Hey there and welcome to this video. I'm Eva, I'm a psychologist and head of content at FlowLab, which is a mental fitness app that helps you to experience more flow states. And today we're going to talk about a topic that should be relevant for all of us, but we'll look at it from a slightly different perspective. You probably read it in the title. It'll be about procrastination and how it can help us to actually be more productive and also enter flow states more often. So we'll cover the psychological mechanisms on the one hand, and at the end I'll also give you a few practical tips to avoid procrastination when it's not helpful. I'm sure we all procrastinate on something, be it your work, preparing taxes, maybe doing your household chores or saving for retirement. The thing is, we usually think of procrastination as something negative, something that makes us less productive or as a sign of laziness or maybe lacking self-control. But there are always two sides of a coin, and what's often not on our radar is that there's also a positive side of procrastination. In one study, for example, students reported that putting off their tasks indeed helped them to work and manage their time more efficiently and also to lower boredom. And it goes even further because it can also help us to find more flow. So if you've heard of the flow state before, you probably know that it's this mental state where you're so highly productive that you forget everything around you. It's effortless high performance. You perform at your peak and also feel fantastic. And at this point, you may be wondering how this productive state of flow can actually go together with this unproductive habit of procrastination. Well, in order to answer this, we need to take a look at the flow science. In flow theory, there is the so-called flow channel. It visualizes that we need an optimal balance between a perceived challenge on the one hand and our perceived skills on the other. So in other words, if you think that a task is too difficult for you, then it's likely that you become stressed or anxious. But if it's too easy, we rather become bored and demotivated. So of course you can make certain adaptations to find that sweet spot, and this is exactly where procrastination comes into play. So when a task is too easy or you're bored and demotivated, you need to look for ways to make it a bit more challenging. And some people use procrastination as some kind of vehicle to find more flow, because the time pressure that comes with it and also this thrill when risking to fail, that provides them with this extra challenge. And we see also in psychological studies that procrastinators indeed felt a greater challenge and were also more in flow, which helped them to perform better in the end. So one main takeaway is that procrastination can be worthwhile, but only when lacking a proper challenge, and that's important. So you could also challenge yourself by setting stricter deadlines, for example, maybe finding an accountability partner who supervises your progress or making a game out of your tasks, just as a few suggestions. But of course, we need to be cautious not to use procrastination as an excuse when in fact there's something else behind it. So the first thing you need to ask yourself is, am I procrastinating because I'm lacking a challenge, or is there another reason for me to put off my tasks? So, of course, these questions aren't easy to answer. So, for anyone who's interested in the psychology behind it, maybe it makes sense to give you a little bit more background. Well, in psychology, we distinguish between two types of procrastination. On the one hand, there are so-called active procrastinators who really choose to work under pressure because they hope for more positive outcomes when procrastinating. So, as I just mentioned, these outcomes can be things like an extra challenge, for example, being more focused or using your time more efficiently. And there was a study from 2013, I think, that showed that flow predicted active procrastination, and that resulted in better academic achievement at the end of the year. So this is one type of procrastination, but there's also passive procrastination. And this is what we associate with procrastination most of the time. These people rather feel paralyzed and are rather anxiety-driven. They have fear of failure and fear of negative outcomes. So they're not hoping to achieve something better, but rather to avoid something bad. And You may know it from yourself as well. When putting off something that needs to be done, but you're anxious of negative outcomes, then you become even more anxious and it becomes harder and harder to get going. And this is called the avoidance cycle. The more we avoid it, the bigger this feeling of tension and the harder it becomes to just do it. So you may think now, if passive procrastination is so uncomfortable, how come that we still end up working frantically on our task just the night before the deadline and get stressed out? Well, to a certain extent, we can blame our genes, because there are two systems in the brain that play a major role when procrastinating. There's the limbic system on the one hand, which is a really ancient and dominant part of the brain, and it's responsible for processing emotions in general. It pulls us toward impulsive behaviors and wants us to feel good in the moment. Then there is the prefrontal cortex, which is the part sitting directly behind your forehead. And it's more responsible for rational processes. It's a much newer part of the brain and in charge of more complex thought processes, such as planning, decision-making, also goal setting. And you can imagine procrastination as a battle between the two. It's the limbic system versus the prefrontal cortex. Feeling good in the moment versus feeling good later. Instant gratification versus delayed gratification. Procrastination versus reaching your long-term goals. And here's the thing. The limbic system is usually a much more dominant part of the brain. And by trying to make us feel good in the moment, it helps us to get this instant hit of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurochemical that we humans are usually craving for because it gives us this rewarding feeling. And this is exactly why the limbic system often wins the battle between the two, and we end up procrastinating once again. You can also imagine a rubber band around your two index fingers. One index finger is your present self and the other one is your future self. And the greater the distance between these two fingers, because you're procrastinating, the greater the tension of the rubber band. And this is exactly the tension you might feel when procrastinating, when you're moving further away from your goals and your ideal future self. Okay, but enough of the theory. Let's get practical and talk about the potential sources of passive procrastination and what you can do to overcome them. The probably most popular source of procrastination is lacking self-regulation. Everything else suddenly seems so much more interesting. So we often give in to our impulses and put off that dreary task. So here are a bunch of tips that you can try to counteract self-regulation failure and get going even when you don't feel like it. The first one is recall your why. Take a moment and ask yourself, what motivated you in the first place to start that task, this work, or your studies? Maybe also go a little deeper and ask yourself, what do you want to contribute in life? What are your values, the principles you want to live your life by? And how can this task help your future self if you put yourself to just do it? And then observe which feelings arise when you imagine that you have successfully completed the task. Number 2, visualize the consequences. The more distant a reward of completing the task, the harder it becomes to overcome that urge of procrastination. Because, imagine retirement seems so far in the future. It's way too abstract when you're in your 20s, right? So in more psychological terms, we explain that with a cognitive bias called delay discounting. It means that we choose short-term and maybe lesser valued outcomes over more important and more valued long-term goals. So spending our money to go out and have fun now rather than putting some aside for a good life standard later. Or sleeping in and hitting the snooze button, then going out for a run before work to stay fit and healthy. To counteract that bias, you can take some time to visualize the consequences of your behavior in both directions. It's called mental contrasting. What will you lose if you maintain this avoidance cycle and keep procrastinating? And what happens if you just brace yourself up and do it? Which feelings will arise in these scenarios? The next tip is identify distracting just a minute habits, because unsurprisingly, impulsiveness correlates with procrastination, right? So if you think about it, which automatic and impulsive behaviors that just take a minute usually knock you off course? Do you just very quickly check your WhatsApp notifications or scroll through your Instagram feed? Perhaps you're a master in letting your mind wander or want to clean the kitchen counter and end up cleaning your entire apartment. The more aware you are of these tendencies, the faster you can overcome them. And if you haven't checked it out already, there is also a guided meditation in the Flow Lab app called Grounded in the training area of ease, which is dedicated to training your impulse control. So make sure to give it a try. The next one is identify the frog. The frog is the most inconvenient aspect of a task. So what exactly is it that you're trying to avoid? Is it that you usually don't really know what to do and lack an overview of the task? Or maybe you need to make an uncomfortable decision, or the task just seems too big for you to tackle? Or maybe there's one specific aspect or subtask that you don't like about it. If you know the frog, it'll be easier to deal with it one step at a time. Ideally, eat the frog right away, as people say. So that means face that subtask or annoying aspect first thing in the morning. And you'll be glad that you did it for the rest of the day. The next one is follow the 4-minute rule. Of course, it's not about finishing your task all at once, but rather about getting started and creating momentum, because studies have shown that this is much harder than keeping the ball rolling afterwards. And to make this step a little bit easier, you can set a timer and work for only 4 minutes on the smallest next step. So devote your full attention for these 4 minutes to the task, and I'm sure this is doable even for master procrastinators to only focus for 4 minutes. And eventually this mental trick can help you to create some momentum, and in the end it often turns into much more than 4 minutes. But even if you decide to quit after 4 minutes, that's also fine. You've taken the first step and the most difficult step as well, and it'll be much easier to brace yourself up next time again. Then set implementation intentions. That's a classic intervention to regulate your behavior. They are also called if-then plans, and they work by formulating in advance how to behave in tempting situations. So for example, if I catch myself scrolling through the Instagram feed, then I set my phone on flight mode and put it in a different room. Or if I notice that I'm distracting myself, then I recall my why and set a timer to work for at least 4 minutes on my task. This way you can eliminate procrastination beforehand and also automate productive behaviors instead. And self-regulation is of course not only a matter of regulating your behavior, because we talked about the avoidance cycle earlier. It's also about our emotions and uncomfortable thoughts. And this is actually the next source of procrastination that I want to talk about now. When we doubt our abilities, it's much harder to get started. Maybe we're anxious what others may think of us, or we are kind of perfectionist and want to hand in perfect work, and this is rather paralyzing, which is also called the paradox of perfectionism. So if you don't know how to cope with these emotions, Perhaps you know that you can also become very creative to find excuses, maybe adding color to your schedule to work productively afterwards, or cleaning the kitchen counter so that you can focus more deeply afterwards on your task. Well, let me tell you that there are better ways to deal with uncomfortable thoughts and emotions. So here are a few tips what you can do. The first thing is strengthen your self-awareness. It's always important that we are aware of uncomfortable emotions in the first place. So one thing that you can do when catching yourself that you're delaying your task, just take a step back for a moment and explore what you're feeling, and really try to do that with a non-judgmental attitude and a curious attitude as well. What is it that is actually holding you back? Is there fear of failure? Maybe anxiety that you cannot live up to the expectations of others or maybe yourself, confusion about where to begin, or maybe you also notice how these feelings express themselves in your body. Maybe you feel certain parts more intensely, and there's really no right or wrong and no need to judge. So no matter what you're discovering, really try to observe them with a non-judgmental attitude. The next tip is question your thoughts, because as I just said, uncomfortable emotions can go hand in hand with difficult thoughts, and I'm sure any self-critical person knows what I'm talking about. So begin by observing what goes through your mind when you think of tackling your tasks. Are there any what-if thoughts, for example? What if people will be disappointed? What if anything goes wrong? What if I'm making a mistake? And I know it's much easier said than done to get rid of them, but really try to challenge these thoughts first, because most of them don't really coincide with reality and only exist in our mind. So what if, for example, all goes well? What if you can gain something from it? You have important and valuable learnings from it. This change in perspective is also called cognitive reappraisal and is widely used among psychologists to cultivate more positive mental habits. And again, we have a specific flow session dealing with these catastrophic thoughts called what if. So if you're prone to negative thought spirals, make sure to give it a try. Then appreciate your accomplishments. This is actually a powerful one, and it's quite simple as well. Try to recall the goals that you've already achieved, any success moments in the past or challenges you have risen up to, because maybe you can identify certain strengths that helped you achieve that. Really dive in and take a moment to celebrate your accomplishments. And once you've identified these success moments and strengths, you may already realize how that can help you with your current challenge as well. Perhaps you can use curiosity, if that's your strength, to approach your monotonous or boring task with a different mindset, or creativity to make a game out of it. So if you like, formulate self-affirmations as well that remind you of your potential in these decisive moments, such as, my curiosity helps me to motivate myself. The next one is give yourself permission to make mistakes. And this shouldn't be underestimated, because many of us have learned that making mistakes is bad. We should avoid it at all costs. And of course, the consequences of making a mistake really differs from context to context. But what we often forget here is that we rarely ever perform at a high level right away. It's always preceded by a learning process, a process of trial and error, of facing obstacles and gaining new insights. And it's absolutely essential for success. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. Maybe even have fun while experimenting a bit, and just take a shot at your current challenge. The last source of procrastination that I'd like to talk about today is something that people are often not aware of. It's a lack of focus, because psychologists indeed believe that low attentional control is related to unintentional procrastination. We're not procrastinating on purpose, but when sitting at our desk in front of our laptop, we may start daydreaming and still delaying what we usually intended to work on. So the good news is that you can train your focus. So try to find any focus point. This can be your breath, maybe bodily sensations, a sound, a visual focus point, or also a thought, like a mantra, for example. And then try to hold your attention for as long as possible on this focus point. And the more regularly you train it, the easier it becomes. And repetition is really key here, because our brain is neuroplastic, so it changes with experience. And with regular mental fitness training, these neuronal connections in the brain adapt, and these mental habits become more automated. Okay, so I hope you had a few learnings today, and if you found this helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos on mental fitness training, psychology, and flow states. Thanks a lot for watching. "11 tips. I could have also just cut it to 3 exactly.
Oh, now we have to refill it.
Oh, sorry.